All right, Jeremy. So before we jump into this week's episode on Connor Kent, I had a recent medical event that I experienced that I thought I would share with you and the audience if you're game.
Oh, I'm game, and as I may or may not have just mentioned to you off air, I'm on the edge of my seat. So please, first, are you okay? Let's start with that and work our way backwards.
Yeah, let me preface all of this by saying I am okay. So the story has a happy ending.
Good.
So there are some twists and turns along the way. So about a week ago, last weekend, I had a bad stomach bug. It went through everyone in our house. I was the last one to get it. And it took me down on Sunday. Right? I know you're a parent of young children. A lot of stuff comes home from school.
They learn to share and they take that personally. That's exactly right.
Exactly. So I overcame this stomach bug. And then that Monday I was feeling better. I was on the mend. And then that Tuesday in the late afternoon, I started experiencing some chest discomfort, we'll say. Kind of in the ballpark of a heartburn, but it felt a little bit more like pressure than that. But I just figured my system was out of whack after all of the vomiting. So I figured this will pass. And it did. After a few hours, it passed. And I thought, okay, that wasn't fun, but that's that. The next day, Wednesday morning, I wake up and it's happening again. And I guess I have to credit my parents for this. We grew up in a house where it's like, we go to the doctor. Like we always went for our appointments regularly. When something was amiss, we go to the doctor. When there's medicine to take, we take it. So I'm of the mindset of like, hey, just go get it checked out. Now, mind you, I'm expecting that I'm going to go to urgent care and they're going to say, hey, take some Tums. You're fine. But I just wanted that reassurance. So I go to urgent care. They do a chest x-ray. That's fine. They do an EKG. And when the results come out, the doctor's like, there's this one little area here that doesn't look quite right. You need to get a blood enzyme test, but we don't do that here. You have to go to the ER to do it because I guess at urgent care, they send the results or they send the sample out, whereas at the ER, they run it there and they can get the results in real time. So I'm not particularly keen to do this, but once again, my mindset is better safe than sorry. So Steph had brought me to urgent care and then she brought me to the ER. She dropped me off because she had to go get our son from school. And we parted sort of with the sense of, probably be good to come get me in about an hour or so once I get this blood result and it shows that everything's fine. So they draw the blood and I'm waiting there. And then eventually the doctor comes in. So it turns out that there was this protein in my blood called troponin that was, and this is the most shocking part of the story, I suppose. My level of troponin was as high as in patients who are having a heart attack.
Holy cow, man.
So the fact that I'm a 37-year-old person experiencing some chest pain with troponin levels that high, people were understandably a little bit alarmed.
It looks like a duck. It sounds like a duck. Right.
So I would say probably the most overwhelming part was at this point where I'm in the ER and I have one person performing an echocardiogram on me, which is like the ultrasound where they're rubbing the gel on you and they can listen and look. While another nurse is swabbing my nose for COVID and drawing more blood, and the cardiologist is coming in and asking me questions. And it's at this point where it really becomes clear to me, I'm not going home tonight.
Oh, no. You had a sleepover.
I ended up being there for 2 nights.
2 nights. Oh, my goodness.
So the cardiologist proposes that we do a heart catheterization. Now, mind you, the word cath lab had come up. And when I hear catheter, I think about it in a very, very delicate spot. And
I'm thinking it's south of the border, not north.
And I was getting real nervous.
Sure.
But then he explained the heart catheterization is they go through the wrist with a little tube to look at your heart to make sure that you don't have any blockage. Now, if they can't go in through the wrist, they do go in through the groin. But still not the most delicate area. It's off to the side.
Reasons to be cheerful, I suppose.
Yeah. And I asked about alternative options. And basically, had it not been that, I would have had to stay even longer for observation and they would have done a stress test. Like basically, the gist of what happened over those 2 days was they needed to rule out my having a heart attack. Like they needed to run a number of tests to make sure it was not a heart attack. And in the end, it was not. But we had to go through this process. And look, they have to lay out all of the risks, but it's like, as he's explaining it, he's like, it's very rare and mostly happens in the elderly, but the tube could dislodge a piece of calcium and you could have a stroke. Like, Jesus Christ.
It's like when you're watching the medicine commercials and everybody's like kayaking, canoeing, and it's like may cause ruptures, death, and all this stuff. Yeah. Not great, man.
Not great. And everything happened very quickly to the point where, and I'm not exaggerating, when I say literally, I mean literally, as I was on the phone with Steph, and of course I'm trying to be very calm. So, she picks up and I'm like, hey, everything's fine.
Got to start with that. Everything's
fine. No big deal. They want to do this procedure. And literally, as I'm telling her this, they're pulling my pants off. And then they start.
Buy you dinner first, at least. My goodness.
That's the least of it. I was shaved in various places. They got to know me very well there.
You're aerodynamic now.
Yeah. And they were all very nice. Like, oh, we have to shave you. I'm like, do what you got to do. It's fine. I'm not precious about this. Just do it.
Right.
So they take me in for this heart catheterization. I have to say, it was a very smooth process.
Which hospital were you at, if you don't mind me asking?
Greenwich Hospital.
Greenwich. Okay, that makes sense. Right.
Very nice. Just a few minutes from where we live. And they gave me what they call Twilight, which is a mixture of fentanyl and something else for this procedure.
No, this is some Project Cadmus nonsense. They put something called Twilight into you. What?
I got it. It was good stuff because I was very relaxed, but still aware. And when they pulled me out of it, like, there was no drowsiness or wooziness or anything. It was just boom, I'm back. It was weird because I've had wisdom teeth taken out and have been put out and stuff like that. You come out of it and it's like, whoa, this was not like that at all. On a positive note, I know now for a medical fact, I have no blockage in any of my arteries. They're totally clean.
That's very good to know. All right. That's good news.
On a sad related note, a buddy of mine from high school, same age, 37, he passed away recently from a heart attack.
Oh no, my condolences, man.
I mean, no, thank you. I mean, we hadn't been in touch in a really long time, but I, remembered him very fondly, and we were buddies. But again, we hadn't been in touch in like 20 years. But when I got that news, it really kind of shocks you. And it was one of those things. I have no idea his family history or his lifestyle or anything like that. But you can't help but think of yourself. I'm like, oh, is everything okay? So I know at least through that everything's all right. So. I ended up having to spend that first night in the ICU, had my own room and a TV, and I watched The Office, and the nurses were great, and I relaxed, and everything was all right.
Well, when you put it like that, I mean, it almost sounds nice, almost.
Believe me, I still would have rather been at home, but it was all things considered, they took great care of me. And then the next morning, I'm expecting to hear, okay, ready to go. But there was yet one more test they wanted to do, a cardiac MRI, and apparently they are exceedingly difficult to schedule. And in fact, they only just got the machine there within the past year. Previously, you had to go much farther to even get this test.
Oh, wow. Well, good thing at least they had it, I suppose, on premise, right? Exactly.
So I had to end up waiting one more day to Friday in order to do this test. So I spent another day just kind of chilling out. I had to eventually give up my solo room, and I got moved to Gen Pop, where I had a rather cantankerous older roommate named Tony. We did bond over that. I was like, hey, I'm Anthony. I heard you're Tony.
And when will Tony be joining us on the show for his own episode?
Yeah, he'll be popping on after the commercial break. I just know
you had some makeshift podcast gear in there. We're like, let's make this count, Tony. Come on.
It's funny. We're doing this just as a little pre-show segment here, but there was a part of me that I'm like, can I make a whole episode out of this? Like, what's the Superman connection? But I couldn't help but think. I spent a whole episode complaining about the fourth and final season of Superman and Lois, where Doomsday rips out Superman's heart. And then Superman ultimately gets General Sam Lane's heart as a replacement and grows old and whatnot. And I'm saying to myself, son of a bitch, here's the connection point. So now I'm going to rewatch that season. I'm going to love it now. I'm going to be like, oh, all the heart stuff, it really resonated.
So did they find out like what exactly was going on here?
Yes. So by this point, even by that first evening after the heart catheterization, even before the MRI, the theory had emerged, which was, and this is what they ultimately landed on, because on that Friday they did the cardiac MRI. That was fine. Heart is functioning totally normally. It's funny for that. They're like, are you claustrophobic? I'm like, I don't think so.
Not until you just asked that question. No.
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, right.
I had this older Russian doctor who was running that machine, who's about to retire. He was great. He was very nice. But you're in there for like 40 minutes, and
Oh, wow.
I just closed my eyes, but like I figured, all right, I'll just relax. Maybe I could even doze off. But no, because constantly throughout the whole thing, you hear the automated voice of breathe in, breathe out,
breathe
hold.
out. Did it have the smiley faces on top too? That told you like when to hold your breath and when to exhale?
No, they didn't have that.
No?
No, but you had to hold your breath for between 5 to 15 seconds throughout the whole thing, but that was fine. But so what we ultimately landed on, and the condition that I have is called perimyocarditis. So basically, an infection, if it's the right one or the wrong one, I suppose, it can trigger inflammation in the heart,
Okay.
either in the lining around the heart and or the muscle of the heart. So the lining is the peri part, the myo is like the heart, the muscle part. So I have primarily inflammation in the lining and a little bit in the muscle. It's not the most common, but it's not as rare as people think, and it does tend to affect younger males more.
There you go.
So that's what it is. Not a heart attack. A condition called perimyocarditis, caused by an infection that triggered this inflammation and made that troponin level spike up. So I have to take a pill for 3 months.
Okay.
Not the worst, but this is going to break your heart. It broke mine. No heavy exercise for probably at least 3 months.
Oh boy. Oh, but it's all right. You know what? What about cardio? We're going to flip the script on them.
Well, even
What
that,
about
basically they said anything mild to moderate, anything that I can do while maintaining a conversation is okay. So I think regardless of what kind of exercise, that's it. It's, I didn't want to be cocky and be like, listen, I could curl the 30 pounds in each arm. I could keep a conversation with you.
Absolutely right.
But
that's right.
We'll take it easy.
Podcaster of steel.
We'll take it easy. We'll relax. And hopefully I can get, jacked up again by the time the Superman movie rolls around in July. That'll be the goal.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. That dude, that's unbelievable. And you know what? As scary as that must have been, and as annoying as it is to take a pill for 3 months, I am so glad it was not anything worse.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And on it, that's the thing. Like throughout the whole thing, it's funny. I know you're a fellow Rocky fan, right?
Oh, of course.
There's a line in Creed 2 at the beginning of Creed 2 where Donnie's about to go in for one of his matches, and Rocky's like, it's only 3 steps into that ring, but it's going to feel like you're climbing a mountain. And that's like what I felt here, where I was like 5 minutes from home, but it might as well have been 5,000 miles. Like all I wanted to do was go home, and I was uncomfortable, and I had the IV, and I was like dying to take a shower. I was like, I want to get out of here. But I just kept reminding myself, like, you're okay, right? Because by this point, like we knew what was going on. I was like, you're okay. It'll be all right. There are people in much worse situations. So just, you can take it. And here's the thing. It would have been great if none of us were afflicted by this, but all 3 of us had the same infection in our house, my wife, my son, and myself. If one of us had to have this, it's best that it's me. So
sure,
I'll take it.
On behalf of dads everywhere, I think we echo that sentiment for sure. Now, they think that's what caused it, kind of that bug just kind of led to that further infection. Wow.
Yeah, the doctor was saying it's a super specific thing where it's just, I don't know, it can like unlock the key of your DNA or something. Like if I had an identical twin, like it could happen to him too. So I mean, it was crazy. Also, more than once was I asked if I've ever done cocaine, because apparently that can trigger this. I'm like, I host a Superman podcast. Like I've never even seen cocaine. No.
Oh God, I really hope you said that to them point blank, just to be like, cocaine. I host a Superman podcast. Have you seen my studio? Look at this. Does this look like a man who does party drugs?
Yeah, I'm like, I have all these Funko Pops. If I were wasting money on blow, I wouldn't have all these pops.
A very PG situation going on here. Okay?
I know. They were very gentle though in the ad. Like the first doctor who asked, she was like, she almost whispered it. She's like, heck, have you ever done cocaine? I'm like, no.
It's like booger sugar. Have you ever,
And so, not to make this a PSA, but I guess I would just say to our predominantly male audience, but to audience members of any gender, if anything's amiss, go check it out. And especially anything chest, heart related, you don't want to take any risks. Take it from me.
Here. Well, buddy, I am so glad you're okay. I'm sorry you went through that ordeal, but my goodness, I'm glad you are home and relatively healthy and on the mend, and you're going to be back better than ever. We know that already. I'm not worried about that for a second.
Much appreciated. All right. Should we get into Superboy?
Boy, that's a hard act to follow, but we're going to have to try.
Here we go.
Let's do it.
Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. This is All-Star Superboy, Chapter 1. And joining me to discuss the Metropolis Kid in Reign of the Supermen is our pal, the host of Cartridges with Care, Jeremy Frutkin. Welcome back.
You know, Anthony, we've been getting a lot of snow here in the Northeast, but today's forecast is some heavy rain.
Very nice. Listen, I'm always game to take the opportunity to revisit the iconic 1993 storyline, Reign of the Supermen, which introduced the 4 replacements following Superman's death. And among those 4, of course, was Superboy, the character we would come to know later as Con-El, a.k.a. Connor Kent. And I have been waiting to do this run of episodes for a very long time. As the audience knows, we spent months last year on this podcast discussing Clark as Superboy. And when I was originally mapping that out, that run of episodes was going to include all the Superboys. We were going to do Clark, we were going to do Connor, we were going to do John. But ultimately, I just kind of ran out of runway. And so I figured, all right, let's put this off to the side. We'll make it its own thing, its own event in 2025. And here we are. So this episode, I feel like, will be a great opportunity to talk a little bit big picture about Connor. As with Superman himself, the same holds true for Superboy, where there are certain questions or tensions that I experience in my Superboy fandom, gaps that I've had over the years. And so I think this will be a fun journey of exploration over these 6 episodes. And in this first episode in particular, we can kind of start to unpack those bigger questions. We also have some great patron questions that I want to get into as well. But I guess let me just toss it to you first, because I know you very graciously reread the Reign of the Supermen storyline, and it's something that I've revisited not that long ago, so it was still relatively fresh, yet I once again enjoyed it. But what was the reading experience like for you going back to, how long had it been since you'd looked at these issues?
I have not read these since the 90s, if I'm being completely honest. And it ended up being such a treat. You know, I think for people like us and so many of us here in the community, right? So much like there's an inherent like, okay, we're looking back with nostalgia and we're going to enjoy it, right? There's an inherent like, this is what we do. We love, you know, the feel good, the warm and fuzzies and looking back. And I think one of the central questions we always wrestle with is like, is something as good as we remember it when we were kids? What does it look like now, right? At the core of things. And I'm happy to say that I don't know if I would necessarily stand up and go to back and say Reign of the Supermen is, you know, one of the best DC comic book events of all time. But I can tell you that I thoroughly enjoyed myself and I thoroughly enjoyed Connor's story here.
Right on. You know, we were messaging about this, and obviously we've talked a lot about the Death and Return of Superman saga, but I think there are a lot of reasons why the event has held up and why those trades continue to sell, and we continue to do episodes about it. And it gets adapted many, many times, as evidenced by our recent episode where we went through all of them. There is a richness to the story. And I think it really is that 3-act structure, because yes, you have that spectacle of the initial death. And even within that, I've made the case, and I will continue to go to bat for the death of Superman, that it's more than just a slugfest, but you have that spectacle. I mean, that makes a huge impact, that moment of Superman's death. And then you have Funeral, which is the beating heart of the story. And it's so emotionally resonant. And the fact that they took their time for those 8-ish issues really, I think, went such a long way. But then this could have easily fallen apart if not for the strength of Reign. It was so additive to the mythology. It brought in these new characters, yet in most instances, they were born out of characters or threads that had already been present in the books. Even including Superboy himself. Cadmus was a big part of the book, so it wasn't like this came out of nowhere. There was a very natural segue from all of the cloning experiments of Cadmus and this character. You had mystery, intrigue, some great twists, and a really climactic finish with Superman's return and that confrontation with Henshaw in the bombed out Engine City. So it's one of those things. Each part of the story, played its role, and I think they all work together beautifully. And that 3-act structure, man, went such a long way. Now, when we talk about Superboy, in this case Connor in particular, I'm particularly excited because this is quote unquote my Superboy. Like I I came around in a really big way on the idea of Clark as Superboy. And I came away from last year's episodes with a lot more appreciation for that chapter in the character's mythology. And I'm really glad I went on that journey. Still, though, in my heart, when I think of Superboy, when you say Superboy, this is the guy, man. Like, this is it. And that we're only on the first episode of this event, but even just in rereading these issues, it's, that feeling has already kind of been reaffirmed. And I stand by that. Is Connor similarly your Superboy?
Yeah, so me and some of my buddies, when we spent last year doing Cartridges with Care, we have a joke because kind of similar to what we're doing here, a lot of what we're doing is looking back on nostalgia, right? And with the reoccurring bit is kind of like, well, we're gentlemen of a certain age, so that makes sense. And this is the same exact thing. You and I are gentlemen of a certain age, and of course, the timing lines up perfectly that Connor is my Superboy, right? I remember still the comic that had the Superman insignia, and you'd lift over the cover and like to see the insignia. Well, in this case was on his jacket. There was one for each of the Supermen, but I still, that comic cover that I would recall is just, it's imprinted in my brain still, seeing that on a shelf in a comic store as a kid and being like, what? This is Superboy. Look how cool he is. And I don't know if there's ever been a more 90s character, at least in the beginning, which we'll get into, I'm sure, the good, bad and everything in between. But yeah, this is our Superboy, and I think it's so easy to kind of look back and be like, oh, yeah, it was like of a certain era. But I was pleasantly surprised, not just with the event as a whole, but with the story arc of Connor in this, right? I think even compared to the other three Superman, he has such a full narrative story arc. And we see that growth. His theme really is growth. And I was so like happy to see that, oh, he's not just like a walking, talking 90s flippant cliche, as I think some people are inclined to remember him, even though it's kind of how he does first come on the scene. And we can also talk about how Superboy would probably be canceled in 2025 for some of the stuff that happens in the early goings of this comic. But he learns his lessons, and there's a really nice, I think, heartfelt ending to it.
I echo all of that. And on that note, yeah, in his first full-fledged issue, Adventures of 501, he says that young lady, that jogger in the park, and he holds her up by the butt, and then he plants one on her.
Oh yeah.
And of course he's 16 in this. One of the characters he'll have a lot of interplay with is the Tana Moon reporter, not just in these issues, but then as we segue over into his solo series, which we're going to be talking about in upcoming episodes. And there's also that antagonist / love interest Knockout, who is definitely above legal age, who pursues him. So there are certainly things, and we say all of these things as always, more just to acknowledge, not to criticize or condone. It just is a reality of what it was, but it definitely jumps out at you as you're watching, as you're reading it, 1,000%.
Well, without a doubt, it truly does. One of the things I found interesting too is you talk about how he's supposed to be 16, but when we see him, and they actually mentioned this in the comic, which I thought was really cool too, is he's really 3 weeks years old.
Yes.
Right. And I thought that was so interesting. That really stuck with me, that like we presumably think of him as like, oh, he's Superboy. He's 15 or 16 years old. But in reality, he's not been on planet Earth that long. Right.
Yeah. I want to talk about his origins, both in the comics as well as behind the scenes, his powers, his characterization, and that arc that you mentioned over the course of Reign. But like I said, we have some great questions from patrons. I'm actually going to play an audio clip from Carter Bruns. Carter is the young son of one of our audience members, Tim Bruns, who we've mentioned a bunch of times. Tim often submits some very cool questions. But this time he handed the reins over to his son. So I'm going to play this. You should be able to hear this. And this will continue to tee up this conversation that we're having.
Hi, Mr. Desiato. I'm Carter Bruns. I am the biggest Superboy fan. Why do you think Connor is the best Superboy?
Well, first, let me say, Carter, thank you for the question. You are more than welcome to call me Anthony, unless your dad tells you that you have to call me Mr. Desiato. And I'll answer this first because I've been letting this marinate for a little bit, and then I'll toss it to you, Jeremy. I think for me, it's 2 things. Number one, well, 3 things. Number one, he's the Superboy I met first.
Yep.
Right? He debuted in April 1993. I was just turning 6 years old. This is the first Superboy I met. This set the standard for what I thought Superboy was. I mean, at that point in my very, very early reading career, I didn't even know that there was a time or a continuity where Clark had been Superboy. So
Right.
for me, this was Superboy. And those first impressions are really, really powerful. So that goes a long way. Number two, and this ties in with what you were saying about the arc that he has, there's a very endearing quality about Connor Kent.
Absolutely.
Of course, I keep referring him to him as Connor. Obviously, he doesn't have that name at this point in time, but you guys know what I mean. There's a very endearing quality. He can be a knucklehead. He can be hot-headed and misguided, led astray, attention-seeking. But his heart is ultimately in the right place. And when the chips are down, he'll step up. And you see that in this when he stops the missile that's en route to Metropolis. So he steps up when it counts, even though he can be a bit of a knucklehead at times. And then Carter, the third and final reason, man, he's just so cool. He's just cool. I don't know what else to say. He's got the leather jacket and the sunglasses and the tactile telekinesis. And he's just cool. So for me, that's why Connor is the best Superboy. What about for you?
Oh boy, yes, buddy. That was a great question. That was awesome. Thank you for submitting that. That made my episode already. That was awesome. So yeah, I'm going to try to do this without completely reiterating everything you just said is what I'm going to do. But I'm in full agreement with all you just said. I think he is my Superboy because he starts out imperfect. And I love that because we have Superman, and not that Superman's perfect, but Superman always works for me and for so many of us as an ideal, right? And there's always something so captivating to me about somebody who chases after that ideal, but isn't quite there yet. Because I see myself in a lot of that. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that as well, too, right? We all have the person we want to be and the person that we are. And sometimes there's a big gap in between that. And I think at the heart of this story, beneath all the bravado and all the just undeniable coolness, as you've already mentioned, we see, a kid really trying to come to terms with not only what it's like to be Superman, but to be a human being as well, too, to learn empathy, to learn how to do the right thing, not just because it's what Superman would do, but because it's the right thing to do.
Beautifully said. And I think the kind of something that's so inherently compelling about this version of Superboy is that he was not raised by the Kents, right? He doesn't have that influence. So he has this power, but he's learning his way. And one of the things that I was really curious about was the fact that the creators, and we'll be talking a lot about Carl Kiesel and Tom Grumman, who created the character and who wrote and drew Adventures of Superman, and then they would go on to the Superboy solo title. But how they really carved out a very distinct path in terms of look and characterization for this Superboy. And I was saying to myself, at this point in time, early 90s, we're only a few years, not even a full decade yet, post-crisis.
Yeah.
If, hypothetically, they had decided to go a more traditional route with Superboy and make him much closer to the traditional pre-crisis Superboy in terms of look and characterization, and basically have their cake and eat it too, right? Like Clark Kent was never Superboy, but now there's this young clone of him who's going to live in Smallville and wear an identical replica of the Superman costume and be Superboy. Like you could see a scenario where someone might have had that instinct.
And I don't want to be just like wildly disrespectful, but that's boring.
Oh yeah.
Right?
No, that's the thing.
We have that
already.
We have that already. We know that story. And that's also why I love this Superboy, right? It's something new. I always have such great respect for the big swings that creators take, right? And the whole event here, Reign of the Supermen, but Superboy in particular here, as is our focus, is such a big and different swing. And what a stark visual, even just looking at the character like we talked about, that really caught people's attentions. And there's a nice different story to back it up as well too. I like that he's so different than Clark. I don't need Clark Jr.
No,
we don't need that.
No, that's the thing. Like I couldn't agree more. Like I couldn't be happier with the way they went, but there's still a part of me I was wondering, was there ever even a push for a more traditional take? And then I said to myself, hey, dum-dum, you don't have to wonder. Why don't you just ask? So I reached out to Mike Carlin, longtime group editor of the Superman books, and I posed that question. I said, like, was there any push from anyone on the creative or editorial side to go with a more traditional version of Superboy? He got right back to me. He said, nope, nobody ever wanted to redo Nobody ever wanted a redo of the old Superboy. Top execs down to readers never even raised the question. We were all happy to have a new character who could stand next to Superman, which
That's awesome.
was awesome to hear. I mean, I think it's such a great instinct. I'm glad that everybody shared it. I'm glad they leaned into it. And like I said,
thank you, Mr. Carlin, for providing that insight as well, too. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was very cool. I do appreciate it. And look, as I said, I grew to appreciate the Clark as Superboy stories. And I think by the time you got to the 80s, late Bronze Age, that New Adventures of Superboy series, I sang its praises last year. But I think by the time you get to that point, you see stories where Superboy is struggling a little bit more, making some more mistakes. I think in those stories in that era, you do see a bit more of a contrast between Superboy and Superman in the present day stories. Earlier in pre-crisis, and maybe there are some diehard Superboy fans who will disagree with me, that's fine. But earlier in pre-crisis, I don't know that you had as much of a contrast where it really just kind of felt like a younger version of Superman.
Right.
Whereas here with Connor, you have that contrast. Like there's a very stark divide. And it gives the character some place to go, right? And
that's exactly it, right?
Right. And the fact that he is operating under the shadow of Superman, they kind of played with that with pre-crisis Superboy, like when he would go to the future and with the Legion, and he would see or hear about the legend of Superman, and sometimes that would weigh on him.
We've had some talks about that in the past, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And even like in the animated series when they did that Legion episode, but still, I think you could kind of only go so far with that. Whereas here, it's so much more literal, right? Where like the actual guy who he's one day meant to fight alongside / replace, like is there, and he's operating in that shadow. So yeah, I think that contrast is really effective. So I think it was a fantastic instinct. I'm glad they leaned into it. But I was curious about that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And that's awesome that you got the official word as well, too. That's amazing.
Yeah. Now, as far as how all of this came to be, this has been discussed on this podcast and elsewhere, so we don't have to spend much time on this. But basically, Superman was originally set to come back with Adventures of Superman 500. Now, I'm not exactly sure if 500 would have followed the same route if that had been the case, but I the sense I get is that was sort of the general idea. Like he has this afterlife encounter with Pod, and like he would wake up. But very quickly, Carlin and the teams realized, no, we need a much bigger finish. And so they suspended publication of the books right before Adventures 500. And they had their emergency summit. They came up with Reign of the Supermen. Everyone submitted ideas, right, for how to bring him back and whatnot. And rather than try to pick one of these replacement Supermen, they decided to do all of them. Like each one would have.
What a move. Like the guts on all of them, do something like this. And you got to applaud it, right? No matter what your thoughts on it, you have to look at this and be like, wow, they really went for something different here, right? I mean, how do you follow the death of Superman? I mean, you have to do a big swing, like I said before, right? And this is one of the biggest swings I think that DC ever did, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was watching an interview that Carl Kiesel did on the Dollar Bin Bandits podcast. Joe Marcello was one of the hosts. He's been on this show. And Kiesel was talking about how there was an attempt to try to pair each Superman with the appropriate book. Like it made sense for the Eradicator to end up in Action Comics, because when you go back to original Golden Age Action Comics, that Superman was not as harsh as the Eradicator here, but it was still that like more old school, Old Testament brand of harsher justice.
Sure.
Steel in Man of Steel obviously made a lot of sense.
Yep.
The fact that you had this, this big twist with Cyborg Superman, right? You want to first make it seem like he really could be the real guy. So putting him in the eponymous Superman title leads you to think, like that's the main one. And then what Kiesel landed on that I think really kind of unlocked it for him was that old tagline from the pre-crisis comics, The Adventures of Superman When He Was a Boy, which made the Adventures of Superman title the perfect fit. And Jerry Ordway was departing that book with Adventures 500, and Kiesel came on with 501. I can't even imagine like jumping into those titles at that time. I mean, that's crazy. He knocked it out of the park. And of course he had Tom Grummett, the great Tom Grummett, continuing on art duties, which I got to tell you, man, I feel like if there's an unsung hero of Superman artists and Superman artists of this era, I feel like it's Tom Grummett. To this day, one of my best performing tweets ever was just a panel from one of Tom Grummett's Superboy issues. And I just said, Tom Grummett is such an underrated artist. It's like 500 likes.
And everybody agrees. No, I mean, Dude, the art just overall, I was so impressed with from start to finish in all of the books. And sometimes when you're jumping out from book to book to book, as we all well know, with different artists, sometimes a change could be a little jarring. I actually found everything to be pretty good, even though they were different. I felt that kind of consistency. It didn't. I thought it was solid stuff all around, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, there's not a weak link in the bunch. And it's funny too, because as I've talked about this, as a kid, I was never particularly keen on John Bogdanov on Man of Steel, that kind of like rougher style. But now, in my adult years, going back and reading it, I love it. I really do. And so, God.
You're gonna laugh because I'm looking through my notes right now just to make sure. And the note I have was, oh wow, I really like John Bogdanov's art.
Yeah.
I was just looking through now to make sure I got his name right when you were saying that. That's the one. And I think, yes, you hit it on the head. It's rougher, but I also kind of like it, especially as we get later into when things are rougher. There's like a nice synergy to it as well, too, with the actual actions and themes that are happening there. But yeah, I mean, take your pick. There's not a bad piece of art, I think, throughout the entire run. And I don't think a lot of big comic events can say that necessarily. So it's a point for them as well.
Yeah. And so that's a little bit, I guess, of the behind the scenes origins. And then in the pages of the comics, I did not ask you to reread this, but I did for myself. I reread Funeral for a Friend as well, which I don't want to belabor the point with this, but I feel like as much as the emotional beats of that are most effective, like there's good quote unquote action stuff in there too, with all this grave robbing. There are multiple attempts by Cadmus to take Superman's body. And obviously this will all culminate in them creating this clone. So even just plot wise, the seeds are planted.
To your point again, which is great. It's just there very obviously was a plan here, right? There was like a very scripted and very intentional plan. It wasn't just like, oh man, what if we put like a Superboy in like a 90s outfit and had him talk cool like the kids today, like, hello, fellow children, and sit on a backwards chair and be like Poochie from The Simpsons. There was an actual intentional thought process, to your point. There was foreshadowing, and it continued on and on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, but rereading Funeral for a Friend, I mean, it's from the first chapter of Funeral for a Friend where Superman is dead in the streets of Metropolis. And the paramedics and the SCU and Bibbo and Hamilton, they're all trying to revive him. And
shout out to Bibbo and Hamilton holding this down as well too. I had to smile when reading their parts, as we've discussed in the past.
The unsung heroes. They're the Tom Grummett of the characters in the story.
Tweet it. Put it out there. You get another 500 likes.
Yeah. Meanwhile, when it's like, hey, we have a new episode, it doesn't get 500 likes. But that's okay.
They're too busy listening to hit like. That's why.
It's true. On a side note, I do have to say, I've come to find it really doesn't make, which I take this as a positive, like it doesn't really make a huge difference in terms of episode performance, whether the social media posts get a lot of traction or not. So people are listening, appreciate it. So that's a cool bit. But even in that first issue of Funeral for a Friend, Paul Westfield shows up with the Cadmus goons to try to claim the bodies of Superman and Doomsday, and Turpin intervenes and just punches him in the gut. It's great. Westfield's like, what's your badge number? And Turpin just clobbers him. He's like, don't worry about the badge number. The name's Turpin.
When are we getting a Dan Turpin, James Gunn show? That's what I want to know. When is that happening?
I don't know. Does he have a family member who can play him? Sorry. I'm excited for the movie. I really am.
I hit a nerve. I knew what I was doing. I was digging, not for kryptonite, but for something else.
If you really want to hit a nerve, you'll bring up the tornado from Man of Steel. People love bringing that up to me. Anyway, so you have that. And then in the very next issue, Superman's been declared dead and the body's at the morgue. And once again, Westfield shows up with the Cadmus guys. And this time, Lex Luthor II intervenes and gets Washington involved and is able to get Westfield to stand down. And
by the way, he looks crazy.
Oh, yeah.
These comics. It's so jarring, having not read this in a while. They just said, oh, you thought Lex Luthor was bald? We're going to give him more hair than any man has ever had on the face of this earth. It is wild.
Yeah, it's this wild mane of hair. More to say on Lex when we get to the Superboy DNA retcon. But so there's that. And then ultimately, Metropolis buries the body in Centennial Park. But then we have Westfield stealing the body, digging this tunnel underground, and the body is taken to Cadmus, and Supergirl and Turpin try to track it down. They end up encountering the Underworlders. They don't make any progress. But then eventually Lois digs in. She gets into Cadmus. She finds the body. She delivers the information to Lex and Supergirl goes in and recovers the body. But there are a couple of scenes where You see Guardian from Cadmus really aghast at what Westfield has done, but Guardian
Guardian was in this much more than I had remembered or realized even. Yeah,
fairly decent sized player in all of this, and he finds this whole business very ghoulish, but the prospect of potentially cloning a new Superman, bringing Superman back, is enough to get him on board. But the reason I bring all this up, because a big bit of Superboy and his backstory, right, is how they were able to create him. And so I bring all of this up to say that even in those Funeral for a Friend issues where Cadmus has the body of Superman laid out on that slab there, it's very clear from the jump that this is not going to be like when they cloned Jim Harper Guardian, because at that point he was still alive. They had a mind that they could imprint upon the clone. That was not the case here. And also they were unable to get a tissue sample because even though Superman was dead, his body, his skin was still invulnerable. So it was very
his
clear.
Aura. Am I correct in remembering what I just read? They said something about like it was like his aura that it was admitting. They were able to extract something from that. That's correct, right?
Yeah. So what we find out in one of the follow-up issues after Reign, it's Adventures of Superman 506, I believe. It's the one where Superboy and Superman are like flying at each other on the cover, and it's Superboy's last issue before he departs the books and then gets his own title,
which I was able to read, by the way, as you can tell by what I just said. But yes.
And so I'm glad we did read that, because that's where you finally get the answer as to how they were able to even do this. And yes, the explanation given, I love what I love in that issue. And literally, I just read it probably like 20 minutes before we sat down to record. But
perfect. I read it today as well.
But I love where Guardian and Superman intercept Superboy, and they want to bring him to Cadmus to get answers. And I don't know, I think it might be Guardian who's like, they might not let Superboy leave or something like that. And Superman's like, they will. Like, I'll make sure of it.
Yeah. And everybody's kind of like, oh, yeah, right. Like, what are we going to do? Right. Yeah.
But so we finally get this explanation there that, they weren't able to clone him the traditional way. So what they were able to take human DNA, that human DNA is not identified at this point in time, and genetically manipulate the body to look like Superman, or a young Superman, since the process was interrupted and he only grew to 16. But in terms of the Kryptonian piece, they were able to identify this aura surrounding Superman's body. And this had been established in the books. It's why his costume, right, was typically never tattered or anything like that, except in extreme situations like with Doomsday.
Yep.
Because anything that close to his skin was protected. And they were able to, quote unquote, translate that aura into a telekinetic field. And that's what powers Superboy. And
now we're deep into that good comic book nonsense that we all love.
Exactly. And that's how he's able to fly and deflect physical objects. But it's why, and you see throughout numerous issues in Reign of the Supermen, energy blasts and fire hurt him. Right. So he can deflect physical, but
good mystery in and of itself, which I thought was really entertaining. Like how he can't figure out how his powers work and even all of what powers he has. I thought that was a really cool approach to this that we're learning along with him as the story goes along.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's why he doesn't have superhearing initially. He doesn't have superhearing or any of the vision powers.
X-ray vision. Yeah.
Right. This is actually a perfect segue. Like I said, there were some kind of big picture questions or tensions that I have felt as a Connor Kent Superboy fan. And actually, I think we have a couple of patron questions that sort of get at this and set this up for us. So let me pull these up here. And again, we're going to be talking a lot more about this in upcoming episodes, but I want to kind of set this up here and we'll see how we feel. Okay, so our pal Rick Reason says, I might be in the minority, but Connor lost his appeal to me about the time they put him in a t-shirt and jeans. Most things past that were to me, but the time from inception to then was just so great, to me at least. Then, counterpoint, our pal Duncan Bennett says, I am right in opposition to Rick. I loved his character development through Jeff Johns' Teen Titans run and thought it was so rewarding and satisfying to see him overcome all of that adversity and save the whole universe in Infinite Crisis, proving once and for all how worthy he was of the name and shield. The Adventure Comics run, I think he's referring to the Jeff Johns, Francis Manapul arc, is one of my favorite super stories ever. It has some of the most beautiful artwork of Smallville from any book I've ever seen. For me, they have never really known what to do with Connor since the New 52, and he occupies a similar space to the aged-up John Kent as of now. How old is he even meant to be in current continuity? It makes no sense to me. He's regressed to his original costume either. Did none of all that impactful stuff ever happen now?
Yeah. Also, and how do we quantify how old is he? Are we going to go off the 15 or 16 or the 3 weeks in this from now? That's a whole big problem. But that's neither here nor there, I suppose. But Yeah, you go ahead. What are your thoughts
Well,
first, and then I'll chime in with my 2 cents.
And this is the thing that I really struggle with, because I feel like when we look at the history of Connor, there are, well, I guess, I don't know, 4 distinct periods. There's 93, where we start here with Reign, through 2003, the start of the Jeff Johns Teen Titans run. That to me represents like OG Connor, where we have that backstory that we just laid out, that power set, the leather jacket, even though his costume does shift from time to time. It's where he's with the Young Justice and the Ravagers. Guys, I didn't forget about the Ravagers. Don't worry. That's like
all
OG.
6 of the Ravager fans. They're coming for you. You better watch out. I'm kidding, everybody. I'm kidding.
So that to me is like OG Connor. Then from 2003 to 2011, we have the Jeff Johns reworking of the character, where in the first issue of his Teen Titans run, we find out that 50% of Connor's DNA came from Superman. The other 50 came from Lex, which is a massive retcon and honestly really doesn't fit in with what you see in these Reign stories, where Lex Luthor II like very clearly doesn't know what's going on with the clone, but nevertheless. And that's also where we get the shift to the t-shirt and jeans look. And arguably, I think, not more than arguably, a shift in personality. I feel like a lot of that brashness and energy gets a bit toned down. And even within that 2003 to 2011 stretch, he's off the board for a few years between Infinite Crisis, when he perishes, and Final Crisis, Legion of Three Worlds, when he comes back. And then with 2011 and the start of the New 52, he's gone. And there's just a different version of Superboy in the New 52. And then eventually he comes back in 2019. So I feel like the third period is the period where he doesn't exist, like the New 52 and beginning part of Rebirth. And then the fourth and current iteration from 2019 forward, where he's back, he's in the leather jacket, he's part of the Superman family. I don't think anybody really knows what to do with him. To Duncan's point, I feel like you're getting people who are coming on with kind of an attachment to the original version. So I think that's why kind of seeing him back in the leather jacket and whatnot. Does the current version fully reflect the totality of his experiences? I don't know. I'll have a better answer in a few episodes, but I feel like those are kind of the main areas. And the tension that I feel is that like, I can't deny the dramatic storytelling value of what Jeff Johns brought. Like the notion of half of his DNA coming from Lex is just, it is inherently captivating, and it creates this internal struggle and sometimes external struggle when he's reprogrammed and forced to, fight his friends. And like this version of the character, like this is the one that I feel like has cemented in the larger pop culture. It's like whenever he's adapted Smallville, the Young Justice animated series, and the Titans live action series, it's like, this is the version with that DNA structure, and the t-shirt and jeans. And I love that Teen Titans run. Like, I love that. I love that, John's Maniple story that Duncan mentioned. I love that Jeff Lemire, short-lived series that came right before the New 52. All good stuff. Yet in my heart, I always gravitate back towards the original flavor of Connor. So that's the tension that I feel. It's not a hot take. I don't know really where I land.
And the real unsexy answer is that you're both right. Right. That's the real answer, is that both of those are valid, completely valid characters, and great characters and important characters. I love the New 52, by the way. Sidebar. A lot of Guardian in that as well, too. I was thinking that when I was reading this. So I will always prefer this Superboy, right? This Superboy in Reign of the Superman as we know him here, because I think, yes, an argument can be made when we get black t-shirt and jeans that like he's grown up. That's awesome. And that's like great storytelling. Stick with me here because I'm going to the weeds, but I'm going to bring it right back around. I'm sure many of you remember in the 90s as well, we did Marvel versus DC, right? And if I remember correctly, it was Spider-Man versus Superboy. And at first I was like, oh, they're both popular. That's why they're putting them together. But there's a lot of similarities between them in this, right? Clone stuff from the 90s notwithstanding, I definitely would give the nod to Reign of the Superman for a 90s clone story. That bar is not particularly high. Perhaps another story for another day. But I love that we see his bravery through his banter, right? Something that we often see on the Spider-Man things, right? On that side as well too. I never put that together till rereading this and thinking about how they were put together to fight in Marvel vs. DC as kind of like comparative equals almost. But I wish we held some more of that bravado and fun in the character when he has his black shirt and jeans. That's my only complaint. I want him to grow up, but just like a lot of these other characters grow up, they still have their sense of humor. They still do the wrong things, but they still also say something awkward once in a while. They make a dumb joke, it falls flat. I think we need more of that. And I think the Superman family has a void when that isn't being filled, right? He was filling a void that nobody else had filled really in that place before. And that's what part of what made that character so unique, right? It gave him such a fun, interesting, new personality while still in his own way being true to the core of what Superman, Superboy, and the values are.
Oh, yes. No, well said. I mean, I think that really hits the nail on the head. I think the other thing that I struggle with, but I think I'm going to get an answer to this when I revisit the material shortly, is I think a criticism has been, and I think I've shared in this, is that it feels like an awfully abrupt shift when we get to the start of that Teen Titans series. Would I go so far as to say it feels like he had a personality transplant? I don't know. I'll let you know. But I feel like that's been a criticism, and it might be a perfectly valid one. And that's why, I'm going to be revisiting a bit of Young Justice and that Teen Titans Young Justice Graduation Day miniseries and the Teen Titans run. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be particularly looking for is we do unquestionably get a shift in his characterization. But between the events of that miniseries and then the revelation about his DNA origins, like, is there enough there to account for it? Or does it just feel like, oh, hey, like what happened to this character? So we'll see.
Yeah, maybe this is just, we have so many DC characters that are dark and brooding. You know, I'm much more interested in seeing this version. And I love it. Instead of like what you might expect by being like, no, I'm a clone. The tragedy, the horror, I'm a monster. Superboy just rolls up and is like, yeah, I'm a clone. It's weird, but like, whatever. We're going to have a good time. I'm going to save some lives. It's going to be fine. And I love that. I love that because that's the kind of person I want with me. Imperfections at all. The kind of character and person who's like, yeah, man, life is hard and life is weird. But guess what? You can still make some jokes and look really cool doing it.
Right on. So I want to talk more specifically about his arc and those character beats in Reign of the Supermen. Should we take a quick commercial break first?
Let's take a quick commercial break.
All right. Before that break, I reached out to our pal Jermaine, Lord Retail Exum of Acme Comics in Greensboro, North Carolina, because I know Reign of the Supermen means a lot to him, and the Superboy character in particular really resonated with him. So I asked him to share some thoughts about his experience with Reign of the Supermen back in the day. So here's a couple minutes from Jermaine, and then after the commercial break, Jeremy and I will be back. So here's Jermaine.
So Death of Superman is kind of where I got further into DC Universe. I was with Nightfall, Batman, but Death of Superman was this thing. You know, I remember trying to get a copy of Superman 75 at Acme Comics during my lunch break, I think in 11th grade maybe. And of course I didn't have a pre-order in, so I was not able to get that at all. But I was ready to go for Reign of the Supermen. I was ready to roll for that one. I knew it was a thing. Copies were a lot more plentiful, shall we say. Retailers really threw in hard behind that. Once I started working at Acme Comics behind the scenes, I did see the cases and cases of copies of unsold books, but as a customer, I was super excited for it. You know, you had your die-cut covers, that was kind of a thing, and you had these 4 new Supermen. We knew Steel was who he was, but the Eradicator, what's that? Cyborg Superman looked cool, very quickly distinguished himself as a problem. Also, Superboy, the Metropolis kid, it just looked cool. You know, the Tom Grummett artwork really set that character apart for me. And that was like a go-to guy for a long, long time. But as far as 90s comics go, Death of Superman, Reign of the Supermen, it holds a spot of invincibility, I guess you might say, with me, of 90s invincibility, where it was a good time. I was picking up comics and I was actually able to get them. And it was a cool gateway into DC Universe. But out of all those characters, Superboy kind of was the one. Even though it wasn't classic Superboy, not that I even knew what that was at the time. But Superboy was the one. You know, he'd go on to interact with the Legion of Superheroes. He would meet people across the DC Universe. It was just a cool thing. I kind of liked that the most.
My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode, and the podcast will continue with more great Smallville and Superman talk even after their series coverage concludes. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself, or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals. Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more. And we're back. Okay, so we can dive in more specifically now to this Reign of the Superman storyline that we reread, and specifically looking at it from the perspective of the Superboy character. So, I mean, just let me toss it to you first. Like, what were the moments or the beats, the dynamics? Like, what stood out to you the most, specifically with Superboy?
You can tell that I enjoyed this story quite a bit, because not only do I have a lot of notes, but like I have to like withhold stuff that is like not Superboy centric for the sake of this not being a 6-hour podcast. And I'm going to do that. One thing I just want to throw out right at the beginning on Superboy related, big surprise that I had, and I guess kind of topical. We had that James Gunn joke in there earlier. I forgot how kind of an important role Guy Gardner is in all of this. In this story as well, too. I was like pleasantly surprised, and I thought they used him well. So shout out to Guy Gardner. I was really surprised just how much Lantern play is in here, which makes sense knowing what happens to Hal down the road. In my memory, I didn't remember so much of like what happened with Hal actually happening during this particular event. I thought it was immediately after. So even as I was reading, I was like, oh, right. Like they're doing it now. Yeah. Like that's Coast City. That's him finding out. I was legitimately surprised by that.
We talked about this a lot on the Patreon show when we looked at Hal's journey. And so people can listen to that full thing if they want, but it's just bonkers to me that such a major development happened to him in the pages of another character's event.
Right. Like, I was shocked as I was reading. It's not how I remembered it happening, to be honest with you. So I was very, very surprised. So shout out to that. I'm going to get us back on topic.
No, it's okay, because on the note of Guy Gardner, I know how much you love, I know you're a big JLI guy, and I think you and I will be talking more about that not too far from now.
Yes,
but
please. One punch.
But I have to say, and I don't think this was meant to be humorous, but it was so funny, but in the best way, when Guy Gardner challenges Eradicator and they throw down, and Guy is ultimately won over by how harsh and severe and badass this Eradicator is.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And it's Guy's endorsement of him that gives Eradicator pause at the end of that issue where he's like, basically this numbnut identifies with me and supports me. Maybe I'm not doing the right thing. That was
when Guy Gardner starts supporting you, you have to stop and hit that pose where you just kind of have your hands together and you're like, am I making a mistake here?
Yeah, I also got to say, on the note of, while we're primarily focusing on Superboy, obviously, I welcome your thoughts on the other characters as well. What I have to say, I have to tip my hat to Roger Stern, who wrote the Action Comics issues and focused on Eradicator, or as he's known here initially as the last son of Krypton or the Kryptonian, but our visored dark Superman. He walked such a fine line, because when you read that first issue of Reign of the Supermen, with this light activity going on in Antarctica and this energy being that's collected.
Beautiful.
And confused.
First thing I sent you when I was reading, what a beautiful opening page. Yeah. With the light show and the Arctic and all of that. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. Shout out to Glenn Whitmore, the colorist, who really knocked it out of the park. But you read those pages with this disoriented, discorporate energy being, who learns of Superman's demise. And he's like, no, it can't be. It can't end like this. There must be power in the body. Right. And he goes to the tomb. And then the next thing you know, he's physical form again. And then the body's gone and all this. And then he's drawing power from this regeneration matrix. It plays great because it's conceivable enough that the Fortress robots reconstituted Kal-El's energy, and he was going about this. But then, of course, when you find out, no, that was actually the Eradicator, and he got confused and he thought he was Superman, it totally works in that context too. So he walked such a great line. The question has come up, like, as a kid, did I think one was the real Superman?
Great question.
I wish I had an answer. I wish I remembered specifically. I don't know. I feel like I probably wouldn't have thought any of them were the real one, to be perfectly honest. But if this is a very artificial exercise, but if I just looking at what's presented, I mean, right from the jump, we know Superboy's a clone, and he reveals that, like you said, like right from the jump, that he's a clone.
Which one of my favorite things. I love that. Just like, yep, I'm a clone.
Exactly.
Put it out there.
John Henry Irons, of course, we know his deal. The closest they get to making us think maybe it's Superman is this idea of a walk-in spirit, like maybe Superman's soul inhabited his body.
Yep.
And even when they give us that flashback of when Superman saved John Henry, there's something like literally drawn between them, like an energy blast of some sort. That it's like maybe some sort of transference happened in that moment. But
it's certainly the most worthy, right, of all of them, John Henry. I think that's not a controversial take.
Absolutely. Yeah, he had the spirit, not literally, but he had the character, right, and that quality. Yep. Cyborg Superman, obviously, that when Emil Hamilton runs that test on him, and the fact that when he talks to Lois, he mentions Kent and a farm.
Yeah, that's what I thought was so interesting, right? They're playing with like the little bits of memories that they can glean from other sources, but we don't know that. So just like Lois, we're constantly left guessing. I thought that kind of like scattered memories and little touches here and there were just great touch. Great touch.
So Cyborg, I think, I could see people thinking maybe it's him, and especially like we said before, that he's in the main Superman book. But I think the one that would have been the most believable, like if I were reading this now cold and I had never read this before, I think the last son of Krypton, because I think the way it plays out in that initial issue, it's believable enough. And the whole idea that, maybe the Clark Kent part of him is gone, but maybe that can be regained, right? I feel like that maybe is something I would think, like, oh, well, maybe, he is just fully Kryptonian at this point, but he can be restored. So I feel like if I were in that position now reading it for the first time, that's probably the one I would glom onto.
I was surprised at the restraint, and this might sound funny, but the restraint that Eradicator showed as well, because I thought, from how I remembered it, he was just out there killing people left, right, and center. But he wasn't. I mean, he was gravely injuring and breaking like a thief's hands and arms for, laying him up for several months. Don't get me wrong, not ideal. But that little bit of restraint, too, I think leaves a little bit room for a question mark, right? Because he's not just out there just murdering everybody. So kind of an interesting gray area we're occupying as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. But all right. So as for Superboy himself, what stands out to you? The moments, what you got?
While we're here for the boy himself, I'll start with this. Let's start with the name. One of my favorite things is don't call him Superboy. I love that. don't call him Superboy. And it's not until the very last issue, the extra credit we talked about that we read today, that he finally, has one last hissy fit at Superman and flies away until he realizes, yeah, you've earned the name. You can be Superboy. And he's like, okay, I'm Superboy. But I love that as well, too, that he kind of rejects that. Also, Metropolis Kid is such a cool moniker. I also would have been okay just calling him that, I think. But yeah, so I love that he rejects that. One of the things I loved is his relationship with Tanya as well, too. I thought it was great because you have the reporter dynamic that Lois Lane and Clark have just from a structure of their professions, but it is different, right? And not counting on anything that happens down the road, but we see growth from Connor here as well, too, because he goes from just, being like that bravado, young, 15, 16-year-old quote unquote kid, hitting on everything with a pulse to being like, no, she's my friend. And in a weird way, in all these like huge moments that happen, that single moment where he says like, no, like she's my friend, I thought was so powerful to me. And it's not like this big moment. It's just in a whole different lines of dialogue. But the fact that that's such a subtle character growth moment for him, right? Because it's not just like, oh, hey, babe, looking pretty cute. We should go out after I save the world. He's like, no, like she's my friend. Like I care about her on a more than a surface level. And there's little things like that are peppered in that I think would get missed if you're a kid reading it, right? Because you're focusing on all the big, and deservedly so, all the big bombastic, the mystery of everything. But deeper in that, there's just such a great story going back to that Connor goes on here, from becoming a wannabe Superman and working in reverse to being like, no, like the real righteous move is not being Superman, it's being Superboy. And, playing off of our expectations, we're always taught, well, not always, but when it's the case, Superboy, maybe one day, Superman. Didn't reverse here. And I thought that was such a cool twist. And the real growth is him accepting that he is Superboy. And that's okay. And at the same time, he's still himself. And it's okay to be different then, as opposed to just living in the shadow of. He's different enough as Superboy.
Yeah, man, beautifully said. That acceptance, that's a big moment. We get close to it in Superman 82, the conclusion of Reign, where Superman is fully restored in his costume again. And
he's the one who says with the font, right? You better watch out. That's the real deal. That's Superman in the logo. He's the one who says it, right?
Yeah, because I think, is it Supergirl who says, like, how is Metropolis going to handle two Supermen or something like that? And he's like, check it, Blondie. Like, that's the real Superman.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, there we go. He's on board. We got him.
Yeah. Yeah. I love from the jump in the first sightings epilogue in Adventures 500, where, the Newsboy Legion have helped him escape, right? But they've interrupted this maturation process, but they've also broken him out before he can be implanted with any sort of suggestions by Cadmus or any sort of controls.
And yet he knows about Star Wars. Well,
that's one of the things I believe that there will be more talk of this in his solo series. Like I said, gaps, right, in fandom. Crazy enough, I've never read the first half or 2/3 of his solo Superboy series. I jumped on board with the hypertension arc, which tied into Hypertime, that I think was around issue 60. So I read from like 60 through the end, but I never read the first chunk of the series. So we'll be doing that. But I think there might be more talk about that. But my understanding is like he has knowledge of pop culture and whatever else, no memory, but like no memory of actually experiencing it.
And to me, that's also, isn't that just like a 15, 16-year-old?
Yeah.
And cleverly in its own way, like talking about all of like the surface level pop cultural stuff, but not understanding how to actually talk to a woman.
Yeah.
Like a decent human being. I thought that's kind of a good touch too, right? Because he is just like this all surface level. But if you're new to being like becoming who you're going to be and you don't know any better, again, it's a very relatable, if not often pleasant, story, I think, about growing up in its own way.
Yeah. Well, even the jogger he kisses, I think she has a line about how, he seemed like a boy. I mean, I guess the insinuation is like even in
you're
kissing,
going to jail,
right? Like
lady.
Well, yeah.
That's it.
The 90s.
Yeah. It's a different time. My God.
But yeah, I love that the Newsboy Legion, where they were even from Funeral for a Friend, when they saw that he was on that slab, Superman's body, like, this isn't right. So I love that they break Superboy out. And even from the jump, when he blasts open that, the tunnel, grate, they make there's a remark about how it's not dented or damaged the way you would expect. So even from the jump, you're getting some hint that like his powers are operating
Such
differently.
good foreshadowing. Yes.
And then, like we said, you'll see that in numerous other instances where fire hurts him. There's a sequence where he's carrying steel, who's on fire, and his hands are burning.
Yep.
And the Newsboy Legion, they give him the leather jacket as a disguise, right? But then it ends up becoming part of his ensemble there, and GBS,
right.
Continues to outfit him with these. We talked about that rescue of the jogger. I love the scene at the Daily Planet with Lois.
Oh, he's so mean to her.
There's that. Is that where he says she looks old?
Yeah, when she goes, oh man, his death really aged you, huh? I read that and out loud to nobody, went, whoa.
I know, but
Cool.
I love when he slicks back the hair and puts on the glasses, and he's like, "Is this Ben right?" And that looks just like Clark, adult
Right.
Clark, which really throws her for a loop. And I like the conversation she has with Martha about like, is this what Clark would have been like? If he had powers at this age. Martha's like, not any boy we raised.
Right. We would have done better than that.
Yeah.
Darn right.
But I have to say, and maybe this is something that only now that I'm older and as a parent, like, really stands out to me more. My heart goes out to Superboy in these stories because no one is looking out for this kid.
Nope.
Like, no one is looking out for this kid. I mean, Cadmus essentially, he escapes and they just kind of, they don't want to risk exposure. So they're,
Like, we don't know, not us. Don't know anything about it.
Guardian does have his back in that one fight, right?
Yep.
That he's kind of looking out for him. But then that's about it on that front.
His only friends are from a television network that want to use him for ratings and for gain, which is such an interesting, still relevant today, albeit in different forms, plot, which stuck with me as well too. That this is all Reign of the Supermen is also a story about warring media outlets, which is not something you would expect to say, right?
Dude, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was another big takeaway upon reread of like, it's a fascinating and still relevant angle for all of this is the role that the media plays, and the fact that you have WGBS, they turn Superboy, but of course they go along with him being called Superman, right? Like that's their Superman. You have Lex trying to get John Henry to work for him, right? And even makes a play for Superboy as well.
Yep. Almost signed the contract. And that was problematic as well, too. That whole thing with Supergirl and Lex, that was kind of gross, right? Like, try to buttering him up to sign the contract. I was like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. To this day, the scene, I guess it's Adventures, I want to say it's 502. It's the one with Superboy and Supergirl on the cover, but where Superboy is
Boy meets girl.
Yeah. Where Superboy was holding the car, and then Supergirl comes up from below. But there's a point where his head is basically at her chest level.
Oh my God.
He says, I was chest choking. I mean, just joking.
I have that written down. Yes.
From when I was 6 years old, that line has been like seared into my brain. I don't know. It must have been so striking to me as a little boy.
It's a shocking thing to read. Even now I read it and I was like, oh, that's not okay. That's not okay. Forgive him. He's 3 weeks old. You know?
No, but so WLEX trying to go after John Henry, trying to make a play for Superboy, GBS with Superboy.
This is a minor note, but like, of course, his station would be called WLEX.
Oh, of course.
A narcissistic, of course.
Of course. And then even, there's a great Jurgens issue of Superman that's all told as an article written by Ron Troop, where he goes to DC to report on the cyborg Superman.
That was a real standout as well, too. Really, and again, what guts in the middle of this epic to slow things down and write the story like that. I mean, that's a brave move to do that. I appreciated it.
I agree. I wonder what motivated that. Part of me thinks that it might have been an effective way to not spend too much time with cyborg Superman, right? Because you can only, kind of show too much. You can only show so much of him, right? And still preserve that big reveal. I mean, in his first issue, right, he, storms in and takes the body of Doomsday and hurls it into space and all that. And that'll pay off in the Hunter Prey miniseries to come. But But yeah, then you go from that to this Ron Troop issue where it's really all through Ron's perspective. But Cyborg Superman's actions are enough to win over the President Bill Clinton.
There he is. No bones about it. That's Bill Clinton. Just written into the comic book.
And then you have the Daily Planet saying Superman is back. So even the Daily Planet, I mean, it's not to the same level. I mean, they're not going so far as GBS where they are actually manufacturing scenarios to film Superboy in. But even the Daily Planet, it's like Superman is back. So the role of the media in all of this, really fascinating and ahead of its time, I feel.
Ahead of its time.
Even though traditional media right now today would be, it'd be social media. But still, like same idea.
Collective sigh. Yeah. The one more positive thing I take away from that, when I was reading the Ron Troop issue, the thought dawned on me that we spent so much time focusing on who the next or who Superman is now. I said, oh, I forgot about Clark.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a way where we see somebody trying to assume the mantle of Clark Kent, as opposed to assuming the mantle of Superman. And I was like, that is very clever and it is very touching in its own way. And I'm very glad they did that, because you and I and many others always talk about how important that angle for Superman is with Clark, right?
Yeah. And who ends up living in Clark's apartment?
Yeah. Look at that. Good old Superboy takes his apartment as well too, right?
Yeah. Where he's playing video games. He's playing a Death of Superman video game.
I have that in my notes, and I was like, Anthony, we podcasted about this. We have a podcast somewhere in the archives about the Death of Superman game. It didn't look exactly like that, by the way, but that's okay. We're not going to hold it against them. But yes, I got a kick out of that as well too.
Yeah. Well, in fairness, I mean, this was before the game. Because the game wasn't until so
95, 96 was the game, I believe. Yeah. So, pretty cool stuff though.
Yeah. No, but that was funny to see that. But yeah, so the media angle in all of this, I thought was really fascinating. But like I said, just the fact that nobody is looking out for this poor kid, and not that I'm not blaming, like Lois or the Kents or anything, but it's just like, if only someone, right. I don't even know how receptive Superboy would have been, but he was really at the mercy, and specifically on the GBS side, Vinny Edge scum. Tana Moon, I believe it's Tana. People might say Tana, but in my mind, I kind of go Tana like Lana.
Tana. I'm going to remember that. Tana. Okay.
But Tana Moon and look, she sees the opportunity here, but there's at least enough internal struggle there where you feel like, okay, she has some integrity. She's
a human being.
She's going along with this, and this is means a lot to her professionally, but she also recognizes the risk and that this is not, not the right behavior necessarily. And then Rex Leach, the business manager,
it's all in the name,
who lives up to his name, and his daughter Roxy, the cigarette smoking Roxy.
God, it was a different time.
Yeah, who tells Superboy he needs help working his joystick. Again, very
very provocative, man.
And then
the
Lex,
ratings board wasn't paying attention to some of these issues, I feel like.
And then Lex, right? Using Supergirl to try to woo Superboy and get him over.
Dude,
so just a lot of opportunists.
I just dislike so much how they use Supergirl for most of this. Like, it's just like, I understand there's a story they're getting to and that they're telling here, but like, it's frustrating. She comes up like big at the end, right? But I feel like so much of this, she's just used to like seduce people. And it's like, this is really what we're doing with like who should probably be the heir apparent to filling the void that Superman left. That kind of rubbed me. That might be my biggest complaint overall about Rain. I feel like we could have, she deserved better. And again, I know there's a story being told, but it's very jarring when you jump in and you see her like that with Lex,
I mean, we'll have more to say about this when we cover Matrix Supergirl in full next year. But it's, we, the audience, know that Lex Luthor II is actually the original Lex in a cloned body, but obviously the characters don't. And by all outward appearances, this guy is trying to help, and he's on the up and up, and Supergirl has kind of fallen under his spell. You understand it to a point. It's still kind of tough, and then obviously you see all of the ways that he is trying to control and manipulate her.
That's really it, right? Yeah, the manipulation.
right? In numerous respects, and even going back to Death of Superman, and it's referenced in Reign of the Superman about how she wanted to get involved earlier and he wouldn't let her,
Right?
And so that's why here, and it is a nice reveal where she's turned invisible and she's been Superman's guardian angel in the battle for Engine City. So I feel like that's a nice moment of redemption. But yeah, it's tough. I think it's a tough pocket of the character's history. There's just kind of an ick factor with all of it. But on the bright side, we're not far away here in Reign of the Superman. We're not far away at all from a 4-issue miniseries written by Roger Stern where all of this comes to a head and she sees the light with Lex. So there's a payoff coming at least,
For sure.
But reading these issues, I get it.
On a lighter note, this is a very small thing, but it made me chuckle. It is in Adventures of Superman 501 when Superboy sees those criminals who I believe are firing at the giant Superman statue. And like they just have a surprisingly in-depth knowledge of how business works and economics.
Yeah.
Just referring to themselves as not getting a loan and and all using these economic terms and stuff like that. And just they're referring to themselves as like entrepreneurs and small businessmen as they have these guns. It was just very either intentionally or unintentionally very funny to me.
Yes. No, for sure.
Very, very silly. The Toastmasters, is that really the best name we could come up with for these guns? Because isn't that like what they do like at weddings and at roasts? I feel like that's all I kept thinking of when I was reading the name of those guns. That doesn't sound scary. A Toastmaster sounds like what makes my bread in the morning. That doesn't sound scary at all.
I hear you. I like, I gotta say, with John Henry in particular, especially they had a lot of ground to cover in a very short amount of space with his backstory. The fact that he was this weapons engineer and then his designs were used without his knowledge and all these people died and he went into hiding and he changed his name to Henry Johnson and now he sees his designs popping up on the street and he tracks down the White Rabbit, his former coworker / lover. They cover a lot though in a short amount of time. I think they do it effectively. I know they didn't have a ton of pages for it, but what I love, I mean, I love the character of Steel, obviously, but I especially love when you get to Engine City and the returned Superman and John Henry are talking. And I like the parallel that's drawn between the two of them where for Superman, and Superman articulates this like a handful of times in Reign of the Superman about how Henshaw has done all of this in his name, wearing his symbol. And this notion of his life's work being usurped and perverted in this way. And John Henry...
What he wants, right? Henshaw says the same thing. That's what he wants, right?
Exactly. But there's that exchange at some point between Superman and Steel where Superman articulates that and Steel's like, yeah, I know what you mean. Like, I know what that feels like. So I like that.
Yeah.
I like that
good
kinship
camaraderie.
between them.
Which, by the way, I don't know if I remembered that, like, was it like supposed to be a dig at the Fantastic Four? Was it supposed to be like a tip of the cap? Like, I didn't realize that, like, Henshaw's, I hadn't remembered, was just like the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, it's
right?
like the horror version of Fantastic Four is Henshaw's backstory, like his wife and the other astronauts. It's like, like if you went through like cosmic radiation, like what if you didn't become heroes? Like what if you died or became these?
You all just have lymphoma now. That's pretty much what happened. Yeah. And you're all just, bad stuff.
I feel like with Superboy, two really critical moments before we get to the Coast City business that I think really kind of move his character along. I feel like one is this setup where he's they send the Stinger, this mercenary called the Stinger, after him, right? And this is set up
moves exactly like Spider-Man. So jumping out with that thing, but that's fun.
but set up by Vinny Edge and Leach. Again to create this scenario to generate ratings, but and Supergirl gets involved and Stinger detonates these explosives and it causes the bridge to collapse. Like people die, it becomes a very dire.
I have it in my notes. Like 12 people died. I was surprised to read that as well too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it becomes a very dire situation. And then hand in hand with that, there's an encounter that Superboy has with Steel. I love as we get deeper into Reign and the Supermen start encountering each other, right?
Yeah.
Like the Superboy and Steel, and then, Steel and Eradicator battle a couple of times. I dig all of that, but with Steel and Superboy, like Steel is tracking down these gangbangers, but he's trying to get information out of them, right? And Superboy intervenes and kind of blows up his spot. But I guess they fire one of these projectiles, and Superboy ducks, and it ends up hitting the helicopter, the news chopper, and the pilot dies.
Yeah, a lot of death. lots of death. I mean, so much death in this. And then that leads to ultimately what ends up being a really great moment between Steele and Connor, right? When they kind of talk about like, oh, I was just as much to blame as you were for that. And they kind of find that very unfortunate and very sad common ground a little bit, right? I think that's when you start to really realize that, oh, he's misguided, this Superman, Superboy, right? But he's not bad. He's not evil. There is a heart somewhere in there, right? There is a heart beneath all that like false bravado and pop culture and, oh, hey, my jacket's ruined. You're going to pay for that. And all of that kind of stuff. I thought that moment between him and Steele was really nice, actually.
Yeah, I like that a lot too. I feel like those kind of went a long way towards showing him like there are consequences to this, and these are instances where you're not really thinking it through, and look what's happening. But even even before that, just with this arrangement that he has with GBS, it's I'm glad they explored this angle because it's not what we would kind of think of as typical superhero behavior, certainly not anything we would expect of Superman, but at the same time, the idea of kind of publicizing your heroics or profiting off of your heroics leaning into the celebrity of it.
Talk about relevance today, right?
Yeah, relevance today, but yeah, just that is it inherently wrong in and of itself? Maybe, but maybe not. Like, so it's, I guess my point is, even as he's doing these things that are questionable, he's still pursuing, a good end, right? Like he is trying to help people, but yes, he's doing it for the cameras and he's leaning into the attention of it all.
I like that pairing with him and Steel a lot because then we have an Action Comics, I think it's 688, where they're talking to Steel about like, oh, are you the new Superman? And he just says, pretty plain, like, I never said I was Superman.
Yeah.
And that gives you just like, oh yeah, like he never said he was Superman. He's just out here trying to honor the memory and do the right thing. And I thought that was so powerful as well, too. There's no mystery. Nobody thinks he's the new Superman. He's just a hero trying to do the right thing by somebody who inspired him. And I thought that was again, reading this with all the big moments, it's these little moments that are really staying with me, I find, which is a testament, I think, to the writing and the characterization of the story all these years later as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. And why it's always fun. I mean, for this podcast alone, I mean, I've reread Reign, I don't know, this is at least the third time I want to say, but each time and reading it this time through the lens of Superboy, right? Like you look at it in a different way, you're picking up on different things. So yeah, it's cool. It's always fun to see what stands out, especially upon read, especially when it's something you've come back to many times.
Yeah, I bet.
There's always something new to discover. I love it.
There is, especially through such an interesting lens. I love that. If you were to ask the scientists of Cadmus, like how you created Superboy, they could have just been like vibes. We just went off the vibes of Superman and this is what we got. That's it,
Well, going back to what I was saying about how that Teen Titans retcon is such a retcon, the end of, I think, Adventures 501 is Lex the Second interrogating one of the Cadmus scientists who was supposed to report to him about like how they accomplished this.
Yeah.
And I but it's fine. That's a retcon. It was not originally intended.
We can't hold that against this. That's right.
Yeah. It's not against this. We hold it against Jeff Johns later, but
100%. Yes. Feel free. Let us know, everybody. Let us know your thoughts on that.
I know we sang the praises of Tom Grummett. I guess, I mean, I like his style, but beyond that, he really does have this ability, I feel like, to capture the youthfulness of this character in particular,
Yeah. And that youthfulness, I think, is such a good contrast to when he is with Henshaw, when he is with Cyborg Superman, and they're flying into Coast City together. That felt like, to me, it could have been straight out of a horror movie. When he says, like, welcome to hell. And like he's going to get ambushed and it's going to be really, really bad. I really felt the tension. And it's because they've done a good job of making you start to care about Connor, right? In the past, like only probably 2 or 3 issues before that, even you start seeing more of those glimpses of, hey, he's a kid. He's a knucklehead, like you said, but he's a kid and he mostly means well. And it's just, man, what happened to Coast City obviously is another, I'm sure that's worthy of its own, and has been with you many, many conversations before, but just him being in there was just so tense and just had me being like, oh, it's going to be bad. It's going to be real, real bad.
Yeah, I mean, when Cyborg, right? So this is Cyborg's whole ruse. He and Mongol have decimated Coast City, and they've pinned it on the Eradicator Superman, and they've called in Superboy for help. Henshaw has some kind of interest in him. The fact that he's a clone, Henshaw feels like he could
spare parts.
Use him for spare parts. He could be of some value. Yeah. But yeah, it is really chilling when. When it turns with Cyborg, when Superboy's there, and I think Henshaw takes out there's like a helicopter like full of people, right? And then obviously it dawns on Superboy that this guy is the actual culprit behind it, and they battle. This is another instance of that tactile telekinesis manifesting, right? He's able to use it on Cyborg's arm. Of course, he's able to rebuild it.
What are your thoughts on those powers?
On the tactile telekinesis?
It's a bit much, isn't it?
Ask me again in a few episodes, because I think part of me feels like, because I know eventually he gets at least heat vision, if not the full traditional power set. People listening to this will know more specifically, but I know the powers evolve. I guess I like it more if it's instead of.
Yes.
Right. As opposed to like, he has the traditional powers and he has this. So I don't know. I guess it's just like, it's been there from the beginning. I'm so used to it with him and this, that I don't know. You sound like though you're not as on board with the TK.
No, well, I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I hear tactile telekinesis and my brain or just automatically goes comic book nonsense. And like, that's maybe not fair. Comic book nonsense before this wonderful community comes after me. When I say comic book nonsense, I say that with love. It's something we're all used to and we just accept and we're fine with it. I do like that it's different. Like I keep saying, it's a swing. They weren't just like, he's young Superman. At least they're trying something different. So I appreciate that, but I don't know. I have a hard time wrapping my active brain around tactile telekinesis. And maybe that's a me problem. Like if I'm like watching a fight happen and he's like, oh, he's doing that because of his tactile telekinesis. It's a step forward in my disbelief. And I know that sounds silly based on what we're talking about here, but again, you, as you always do, made an excellent point. It's been there from the beginning, at least. It was the plan all along. And I at least appreciate that it's different. Would I prefer him just having Superman's powers but diminished? I don't know. I appreciate that it's different, but I also think it just might be, I don't know, easier to digest. But we've had several decades to digest it, right?
I mean, in fairness to you, it's like, it's not the easiest thing to explain.
Right. I felt like they really tried to explain it, but that's the thing, right? If you have to spend so much time explaining something, it inherently makes me think, you know?
Yeah. That's a fair point, because clearly with all four replacements, they carved out a distinct path in terms of visual, in terms of characterization, each one kind of representing a different aspect of the character. No one was fully the one true Superman. And in their powers as well, right? Like Eradicator can't stand the sunlight, can't process sunlight the same way, and has these energy blasts. Cyborg, but like with Cyborg, it's just such an easy visual cue, right? That his arm can change into different weapons, right?
Do you think they saw Terminator before this or no? Just a big coincidence, maybe?
But so energy blasts or cybernetic arm, like they're just easier to convey. I feel like with the tactile TK, it ends up being a lot of having to explain it over and over. Oh, that's right. I feel like I've complained, but eagle-eared listeners probably were. I feel like I've complained about this over the years. About like how often they have to explain the tactile telekinesis. As I'm saying it, I'm kind of reminded of that. Yeah.
It's like, remember, he's got tactile telekinesis. It's like, man, like, all right, fine. Like just have him do what he's going to do. You don't need to explain it anymore. Like I'm over it after this much time. But yeah, just something I was thinking when I was reading this.
But when Cyborg gets the jump on him and like swipes at his head and you just see like that blood splatter at the end of that issue, it's like, damn.
You think he's dead? It's crazy.
And then he's totally fine.
It's totally fine. It was his tactile telekinesis. You know what I mean? It protected him. Don't
feel
worry
like-
about it.
Look, I love these creators. They maintain such continuity issue to issue. I feel like maybe he should have been a little more banged up at the start of that next issue.
At least give him a black eye and some blood out of his nose. Like that's all I need, at least, you know?
Yeah, but he's all strapped up. But then you got the payoff where he uses that tactile telekinesis.
There it is.
To free himself from that contraption.
To your point, yeah.
Mongol, who's working against Cyborg, played that video footage so that Superboy knows what the next target is, Metropolis. And this was the other. I mean, I feel like this is. It's not the end of his story in Reign, because he shows up again for the climax. But like this is really, I think, the high point of his story in Reign, where
this is where we're on board, right? Where we're rooting for him at this point. At least I am, right? Like okay, get out of there. You got to help. You got to warn everybody. That's when they get us fully on board with Connor here. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, he makes it back to Metropolis just in time for Steel and Lois and Lex and Supergirl to converge, like down at the docks as the one true Superman emerges. And I love that. I love that Kryptonian battle suit.
I know you do. It's pretty darn cool seeing it march through the ocean that whole time as well too. That's cool. It was a very, very cool sequence of events.
I looked it up on, because I used to own that and I got rid of it years ago. I looked it up on eBay. I might circle back to that at some point.
You're worth it. You deserve it and you're worth it. All right.
Yeah, I know.
Guys,
after my whole hospital stay, I should treat myself.
Yes, you should. You heard that? Patreons, get on it. Come on. Patrons, let's help our guy out here. Come on.
But then again, we get our trio of Superboy, Steel, and Superman. Really quartet, because we have the invisible Supergirl, going back to Engine City. And then, when they fire that missile and he jumps on it, like that's what I meant to say as the real high point. Not just him escaping, but then him jumping on that missile.
Oh, Mike, doing the old Dr. Strangelove routine, right? Riding the missile, and we're rooting for him. But we want him to save the day, and he does. Yeah, and he does. He's a hero. That's what this is about, right? It's not about a boy becoming Superman. It's about a boy becoming a hero.
Yeah, yeah. From outward appearances, right? Cyborg looked like he could be the one. Eradicator to an extent, I guess, if you subscribe to a more severe style of justice. But you look at Superboy, right? And from the jump, it's like, by his own admission, he's a clone, he's younger, this and that. But, he proved he had, what it took in the end. And he's able to divert that missile, big explosion. He's a bit woozy after that. I know Lex accosts him looking for Supergirl. And then he shows up again for the climax in Engine City and has that moment we talked about, that's Superman.
Which, by the way, and I'm nitpicking here, of course, with love, but Engine City, like that sounds like an 80s rock song. Like we could have done better than that. Yeah.
Oh,
that's so menacing. Engine City is like the place where my kids go go-karting on the weekends. Dad, can we go to Engine City? Yeah. That's what it reminds me of.
Fair. Going back to that Carl Kiesel interview that I mentioned, he talked about how he, wanted to capture the voice of the youth, but was always, I think he was essentially saying, like, always a little bit self-conscious if, whether or not he truly nailed it. But he bought a slang dictionary and he used that.
I love that so much.
Here's my view on it. I think it worked. I mean, it's hard though, I think, for us in 2020, like essentially we have to say, like, here in 2025, does he sound like a 16-year-old would sound in 1993? It's like, I don't know.
I can kind of answer that question.
Yeah.
This is going to take a turn that I don't think anybody's going to expect. And I shared with my wife, who, as mentioned before on these podcasts, is a saint and also, takes at least a passing interest in the stuff I do here. One of her favorite shows is Baywatch. And we have been rewatching Baywatch, which takes place in the 1990s. And David Hasselhoff's son is a teenager in the 90s throughout most of this. And I kept sending my wife screen caps of Connor in this and being like, he's just Hobie Buchanan from Baywatch. So I'll say, well, I can't say the average quote unquote child. It was definitely the same words, attitude as I saw from a teenager in that show with this, forming some kind of continuity, whether it's a real kid or it's what people thought kids were then. So I got a big kick out of that as well, too.
Right on. How many episodes of Baywatch are there?
Oh, Anthony, there's so much. We're on season 9. And I got to tell you, listen, I might start a Baywatch podcast. Okay. It's insane. It's the craziest show I've ever seen. And this is about Superboy. I'm not going to take us off the road here, but it is such a 90s piece of Americana that's crazier than you'd ever think. I'll leave it at that.
Amazing. Yeah. But yeah, from my view, it always rang true. But what I would say, it's like, even if it ever didn't, or if anyone feels that it doesn't, this is a kid who was fed right
Yeah.
information. So if it doesn't always ring true, I think you can kind of chalk it up to that. So it works for me.
He even throws in a Captain Kirk
Yeah.
reference as well too, if I'm not mistaken, right? Because Clark says to him, Peter Pan. He goes, no, Captain Kirk said that. I thought that was cute as well too.
You know,
Are we ready to talk about towards the climax of this when our dear friend, Mr. Kent, the one and only, decides that he's had enough of everybody's nonsense and just straps himself in like Frank Castle and just lights people up left, right, and center with restraint. He only hits the robots. Don't get me wrong. But my goodness, like, I get it and I was happy. But at the same point, I was like, this is pretty wild, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very striking visual. Strapped like that. Yeah.
It's crazy. Just mowing people down left, right, and center in black. And yeah, I get it. Don't get me wrong. I get it. But yeah. I guess they needed a way to make Clark still hold his own and get through it, right? So what else are you going to do if he's not really powered? He's not going to fight these things hand to hand, right? So I get it. I get it. It is just a jarring visual at first.
Yeah. As we kind of wind down here, last couple of things, I guess. It's funny, when I was first planning this run of episodes, I wasn't going to do a Rain episode because I figured we've talked about Rain before, and obviously Superboy's there. There's only so much. It's not squarely centered on him, but I felt like, I want to spend the time. If we're really going to do this, like, let's go back to the very beginning and kind of look at those earliest appearances. And I think it's been great because it's allowed us to really zero in on these individual beats, which is pretty cool. But it's knowing how the Superman-Superboy relationship in particular will evolve, to the point where Superman will eventually bestow him the name Con-El and make him an honorary Kent and have him live with the Kents, and bring him into that inner circle. It's amazing.
We see the seeds of that, even what we talked about before too, when Lois is talking to Mom and Pa Kent, like you said a little while ago, right? Oh, not any boy we raised. And there we go.
Yeah. So to see the very, very beginnings again was cool. This isn't Superboy specific, but I'm curious to get your take on this, having just reread it for the first time in so long. I mean, how do you feel about the way in which they explain Superman's resurrection? Was it satisfying?
No.
Oh.
And I say that with love and respect. I say that with love and respect. It's because we've already seen so many potential explanations for him coming back, especially with all of the Eradicator stuff that you just touched upon, that by the time where we finally get to him being back, I'm just like, okay. Like, sure, this could have been it. This could have been it. I feel like I've already heard so many versions of how he could have possibly came back. I was just more happy that he's back. So it is ultimately such a positive. Even one of the covers even says like back for good or something like that. I saw that and I was like, all right, cool. The how at this point, I'm like, listen, man, I have listened to so much just comic book nonsense about people's auras and tactile telekinesis and cybernetics and copyright lawsuit off-brand Fantastic Four in space. I've seen all of this fantastic stuff, which I all enjoyed. Very entertaining. Don't get me wrong. By this point, he's back. How we get there by the time after everything I just read is incidental to me. I'm happy he's back. Let's go. Let's see how he's going to help restore his legacy and clean this up. And guess what? He's going to have at least 2 brand new heroes in his family and an extended family. Let's see how they work together. That's what gets me excited and happy about this story.
All right, fair enough. I think it's I think I just studied it so much as a kid, those issues where it's explained. I mean, I guess the issue of Action Comics where the robots finally talk about what's going on with Eradicator. They're like, this guy's crazy.
Robots get a lot of play.
Yeah, they're like, this guy's really confused.
Yeah, this guy's nuts. What's going on in there?
But there's that. And then Superman 82, when Eradicator and Superman finally link up again, you get a little bit more. And then one of the aftermath issues was an issue of Action Comics where Dr. Occult shows up and essentially explains everything to Lois and Clark. And, they really hammer home, no, you were dead. It's not just a matter of getting more sun.
Yeah.
But that it was this combination of this afterlife experience with Pa Kent where you decided to fight for your life. And that's when the spirit re-entered the body. And that's why Eradicator's essence was not able to take over.
I like the moment we get with Pa Kent. I don't want to like take a dump all over that because I think that's meaningful and I think that's beautiful. And I love that, especially as a dad, as we talk about all the time. I love that. In terms of an explanation, I mean, I'm just kind of like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Fine. Whatever. He's back. That's what's important.
But I guess I guess this came up just when we did our adaptations episode, because I feel like that's the part that's always missing from these stories. Like most adaptations, when they do this, it's always just kind of the physical. It's like, oh, you gotta, however they do it, and it always changes. Yeah. But the comic really hit on the fact that it's the spiritual and the physical, and you have to have both. You need that rejuvenation matrix, and you need that experience in the afterlife. So to me, and I don't know, I guess because I was so young and studying it, like it just became gospel to me. It's like, this is how he comes back from the dead. And it's like, it's great. So that always worked for me. And I guess what I appreciated about it too, is that like, even by the time Kal-El emerges from the rejuvenation matrix in the black Kryptonian garb, it's like, you're still not, and even in that issue, they're still kind of playing, you're not entirely sure. Like, could it be Eradicator? Because he's
right.
We're still not entirely sure. But
he says Mockingbird, to kill a Mockingbird.
By the time we get to that point, right? And scene with Lois. But I'm just saying, it's like, even that, like, it was kind of a slow burn. It wasn't just like, oh, boom, this is definitely the guy. Like, they maintain that.
Which I appreciate.
Yeah. It was totally fun to revisit. Is there anything else about Superboy or any other aspect of the story that we didn't hit on that you wanted to?
I think with Superboy in this comic, they succeeded in creating such an interesting brand new character that's been able to stand the test of time, albeit with some changes, both physically and characterization wise, all notwithstanding, and for Steel as well too. And you know what, really, if you want to go even a little further, not saying that they're necessarily less than, but even all four characters in this that they created, it wasn't just like, look at these one-off characters who are just like, oh, they could just, because they could have done that, right? And then Superman could have come back and there could have been some MacGuffin where they all disappear or something happened. This story was written with intention. And I think a lot of comics and media in general, sometimes when they're not at their best, are not written with that plan and that detail and that intention. And it's clear in Connor's story more than anybody else's story in this comic that this is very much a story about relationships and about growing and about what you do when one of the most horrible things can happen, when you lose somebody important, right? Maybe to some people that's Superman. Maybe to some people that's a parent, a friend. We all can relate to that loss. And as shocking as it is to see Superman die and fight with Doomsday, and it's one of the most iconic comics of all time, as is well discussed by you through many, many wonderful hours that I always enjoy hearing. Just as important to me, if not more so, is what happens next. And anybody can create, with enough gusto, a great moment like that. But be able to take that moment and to be able to write just a compelling story after, I think is something that everybody involved with this should feel extremely proud of. And I've thoroughly enjoyed the experience of reading it.
Amen, man. Amen. Look, it's always impossible to kind of separate out the nostalgia, the personal connection from the story itself. But looking at it as objectively as I can, man, it holds up and I love it. And it's always fun to revisit. I appreciate you coming on this ride with me. You mentioned these characters, Steel and Superboy in particular, but all of them, right, and how they've gone on to live on. And so, obviously, we talked about Reign of the Supermen. Right after this, there were house ads promoting the debut of the Superboy solo series, the Steel solo series, and that 4-issue Supergirl miniseries. And the banner that was used for these house ads was Reign of Tomorrow.
Nice. So
it wasn't an official storyline or publishing initiative even per se. I don't know that was ever even used beyond those house ads, but Reign of Tomorrow. And that's where we'll be going next. Next week, we'll be looking at the initial run on the solo Superboy series by Carl Kiesel and Tom Grummett. They had an initial run, they left for a bit, then they came back. So next week, we'll be looking at that first run. And with the exception of the first few issues, it's going to be all new for me. So I'm excited to see how they set up this new world setting, supporting cast for Superboy in Hawaii. A fascinating setting.
Yeah.
One of the things that's come up recently, right? A number of us have complained about the sheer size of the Superman family in the current Superman books and how they're like all in Metropolis. Yeah. And I think there's something to be said for, let's explore other corners of the DC universe.
Yeah, so even Nightwing went to Bloodhaven, right? There's a precedent for this stuff. Yeah,
totally. So that's where we're going next. A lot more to come on Superboy, but we had to start here. And I appreciate you coming along for this ride. We mentioned your podcast, Cartridges with Care. Anything you want to share with folks about that?
Oh yeah, I had a great time last year making all those episodes. They should be available on Spotify is usually primarily the main places where they are. We haven't had any new episodes this year because I have been busy auditioning, which has been a ton of fun, and I'm still lucky to be able to do all these years later. But that's an open invitation. Anybody ever wants to talk about video games, comics, anything, just give me a holler. Thank you, Anthony. And thank you to this community. I love this community so much. I love just going on to the Facebook group and seeing what everybody's chatting about and what everybody's, got to say. And so, it's wild to think we've been doing this. I've been a guest on the show for multiple years now. And I really appreciate it. I always enjoy being here. So thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure. You'll be back. There are a couple episodes that you and I have talked about that you'll be back for. And
yes, sir.
I guess as we wrap up here, let me just share that with this episode, Digging for Kryptonite is going to cross 100,000 downloads.
All right.
Which I'm very grateful for and honored by. Now that's not per episode, but it's quite the milestone. Over the years we've I've shared when we've hit 5,000 or 10,000. And we've grown and we've really had some really great growth over this past year in particular. Now, again, as I always say, whenever I share these milestones, it's all relative, and the biggest podcasts in the world, that's a drop in the bucket for them. But for your quote unquote average podcast, it's really something. And I appreciate everyone who listens. I appreciate everyone who's listened from the beginning. I appreciate everyone who's joined us along the way. I appreciate those who maybe fell off along the way, and maybe they'll rejoin us in episodes to come. So I love doing this, and I really appreciate it.
There's no better time, especially with all the Superman in the air this year. There's no better time to get back on Digging for Kryptonite. So you should be very, very proud, Anthony. And I know for a fact I'm not the only one who's very thankful that you started this and that you've created this wonderful space and universe for all of us to talk about the things we love. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, audience. I always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back next week for Chapter 2 of All-Star Superboy. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Support the podcast and receive exclusive content, including bonus episodes, by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Flat Squirrel Podcasts is home to Digging for Kryptonite and another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman. Please subscribe, rate, and review today, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all